Urgent U.S. Treasury charges sanctions. Revision date: July 31, 2019, 23:26. International, Al-Furat News. The U.S. Treasury Department on Wednesday imposed sanctions on Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Jawad Zarif. The U.S. Treasury Department has imposed sanctions on Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Jawad Zarif, the agency said. The New York Times quoted administration officials as saying sanctions against Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif would be imminent. Al-Kabi, the Ministry of Finance is obliged to implement Article 10 of the budget law relating to the obligations of the region. July 31, 2019. The first Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, Hassan Karim Al-Kabi, said that the Ministry of Finance must be obliged to implement Article 10 of the budget law with regard to the share of the region and the consequent financial obligations to the central government and pay compensation damages. The obituary publishes the text of the press office statement of the Kabi. On the first Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives in the House of Representatives Wednesday 31. July 2019, an expanded meeting of the Finance Committee and the Committee on Oil and Energy in the presence of a number of MPs on parliamentary committees, and Finance Minister Fouad Hussein and Oil Minister Thamur Gadban and Head of the Office of Financial Supervision and Integrity Agency Salah Nouri, to discuss the oil file of the region and the lack of commitment of the provincial government to implement the provisions of the General Budget 2019. Al-Kabi said that the problem of selling oil of the region and the share of the region in the general budget is not new, but the subject of permanent debate in almost every year, specifically during the stage of preparing the budget. Noting that today as a parliament agreed to find a final legal solution to this file with insistence on the implementation of all parties to the provisions of the Iraqi constitution which stipulates that oil and other wealth is the property of all Iraqis and no one has the right to go otherwise. He pointed out that the text of the federal budget law is the legal and legislative framework for resolving all financial disputes. He stressed that the text of the federal budget law is the legal and legislative framework for resolving all financial disputes, while demanding all executives to answer the questions and queries of the House of Representatives and provide the deputies with all the needs of answers and documents, being a constitutional right as a representative of the people and is charged with a supervisory and legislative duty. The meeting agreed on the implementation of a number of recommendations, including the obligation of the Ministry of Finance to implement Article 10 of the budget law with regard to the share of the region and the consequent financial obligations to the central government, and calculate the damage rates due to lack of commitment of the provincial government in coordination with the Finance Committee. In addition to the activation and sustainability of the dialogue between the central government and the provincial government to reach understandings and solutions to all problems, it was also agreed to entrust the Finance, Oil and Energy Committees to receive all the official responses from the Ministries of Oil and Finance and the Office of Financial Control and analysis of inputs and answers to this meeting, and submit the report and recommendations for submission to the House of Representatives to take the appropriate decision, all special accounts, the number of employees and all other belongings in the Kurdistan region. Central Bank grants the administration of Habayna Tourism hundreds of millions to qualify. Posted by Walter. July 31, 2019. Date of release: July 31, 2019, 18:22. Economic, Euphrates News. The central bank announced Wednesday, granting the administration of the city of political Habayna hundreds of millions for the purpose of requalification. The bank said in a statement received by the agency, Euphrates News, copy of it today, that coinciding with the approaching days of Eid al-Adha, and in order to support the tourism sector and recreational reality in Iraq, the Central Bank of Iraq, and through the initiative of Tamkeen funded by private banks and exchange companies and supervised the Association of Private Banks, granted the management of the tourist city in Habayna an amount of 800 million Iraqi dinars, to be spent for the maintenance of the city facilities and completion of preparations for the reception of visitors to the city. The initiative of community and humanitarian activities, Tamkeen, launched by the Central Bank of Iraq at the end of 2017, aims to support and finance activities and projects of a social, humanitarian, environmental, cultural and artistic nature. Iran deleted 4 zeros from its currency. July 31, 2019, 10:40. International, Al-Furat News. The Cabinet of Ministers of Iran approved in its meeting Wednesday a proposal to delete 4 zeros from the national currency rial. The governor of the Central Bank of Iran, Nasser Hamidi, is due to present details of the new government decision later. The official price of the US dollar is 42,000 rials. The judiciary seeks to lift the immunity of 21 deputies and reveal their crimes. Baghdad, Al-Furat News. The media center of the Supreme Judicial Council clarified on what was published by some media on the not receiving the parliament requests to lift the immunity of any deputy, a statement received by the agency. Euphrates News, a copy of it. The The Supreme Judicial Council sent through the presidency of the prosecutor's request to lift the immunity of 10 members of the House of Representatives on charges related to administrative corruption offenses during their tenure in executive positions, and sent a request to lift the immunity of 11 as a deputy for other crimes not related to administrative corruption. He pointed out that the Supreme Judicial Council replied to the Integrity Committee in the House of Representatives regarding the submission of a list of what is required to lift the immunity and was done. He stressed that the Supreme Judicial Council takes into account the privacy of the political and social situation of members of the House of Representatives required to lift immunity from them, especially that their legal position is still in the role of investigation or trial and have not been convicted of final provisions so that their names can be authorized. The High Judicial Council stated that this approach was generally accepted by the Supreme Judicial Council not to declare information that might harm a particular person until such information has been established under strict judicial decisions. He pointed out that those wishing to verify the validity of communications regarding requests to lift immunity can review the competent administrative authorities in the presidency of the House of Representatives and ensure that the document is an important government decision to guarantee the members of the Interior and Defense. Release date: August 1, 2019, 12:29. Baghdad, Al Furat News. The General Secretariat of the Council of Ministers directed all state institutions to accept the sponsorship of employees of the Ministries of Interior and Defense to apply for advances and loans. The document issued by the Secretariat got the agency, Euphrates News, a copy of it, was directed to the Bank of Rashid accept the guarantee of employees of the Ministries of Interior and Defense to apply for advances and loans. According to the controls, Nasiri calls on the government to activate its decisions to support private banks. August 1, 2019. Economy of Iraq, Baghdad. The economic and banking advisor to the Association of Iraqi Private Banks, Samir Nusayri, on Thursday, to activate its decisions on government support for private banks, which issued earlier but did not implement what was intended by these decisions. Al-Nusayri said in an interview with Economy News that the structure of the Iraqi banking sector consists of 7 government banks, which account for 86% of the total deposits of the government and the public, and 78% of the total assets, and private banks constitute 70 commercial and Islamic banks and invest 78% of the capital of the banking sector. He pointed out that the objectives set for the banking sector in the fourth axis, strengthening the economy, in the government curriculum focused on achieving lending for development, considering banks as a lever for development and building bridges of trust with the public, and achieve financial coverage in the sense of expansion and spread presented by JAT and banking services and the practice of real banking and digital transformation of the banking sector in accordance with the time limits specified in the government program. Al-Nusayri stressed the importance of stimulating and revitalizing the economy with banking finance and banking facilities in the face of its implementation at present. Despite the great efforts exerted by the central bank since 2016 to implement the objectives of its strategy for the years 2016 to 2020, the most important of which are the structural and technical developments in banks, increasing the proportion of financial coverage and investment in human capital, and moving towards stability in the monetary system and stability in the exchange rate. Year and a half. He pointed out that the banks also need government support for the purpose of achieving what is stated in the governmental curricula, taking into account the following. The nature of the activities of the banks depends on the nature of the activities of the economic sectors. As long as the economic activity is concentrated in trade, imports, the activity of banks remains focused on foreign transfer and related therefore, unless the other sectors, industry, agriculture, tourism, and others move to predict the diversity of banking activity, the legal environment and the extension of the rule of law should be provided to eliminate the phenomenon of default in the repayment of loans, form a large proportion of total credit granted, and thus reluctance of banks to provide loans and banking facilities. Without the control of imports, these sectors will not rise, which explains the lack of progress on serious loans through the initiative of the central bank. He added that the non-activation of the decisions of the Council of Ministers and the Committee on Economic Affairs and the Council of Ministers, which had previously been issued to support the banking sector, especially private banks, have impeded the activities of private banks and significantly affected the liquidity and revenues and deposits for that and for the purpose of implementation of the government program to ensure the transition the role of banks from banking to the developmental role and the revitalization of the banking business requires the government and in particular the Council of Ministers and the Committee on Economic Affairs to activate the decisions that have already been issued by the Council of Ministers and the Committee on Economic Affairs and is also documented in numbers and the following dates. 1. Not to accept the Ministry of Finance to open bank accounts for ministries and state departments and private banks and to reserve them in government banks under its Book 207 dated January 31, 2019. to activate the decision to allow ministries and government departments to open documentary credits in private banks up to $50 million without going through the Iraqi Bank for Trade. 3. Activation of the Council of Ministers Resolution No. 110 of 2009 and the decision of the Committee on Economic Affairs 141 on February 20, 2012 regarding the transfer of government documentary bank credit up to $30 million to private banks through the Iraqi Bank for Trade. 4. Activating the decision of the Committee of Economic Affairs No. 253 of 2015 regarding the acceptance of instruments ratified by private banks to pay insurance and customs fees and taxes. Second, activating the Cabinet Resolution No. 378 of 2018 concerning the collection of government fees in the government departments through electronic payment. Third, activating the Financial Services Court formed in accordance with the Central Bank Law No. 56 of 2004. And the court may refer cases that require referral to the competent courts in accordance with the applicable penal law. 4. To consider the debts of troubled banks' customers and the private banks' urgent claims and excellent debt like government debt. 5th, in addition to the efforts of the central bank, requires the government also to work to provide conditions and take measures to help private banks to obtain a credit rating adopted internationally and thus strengthen international banking relations with corresponding banks. 6. The Ministry of Finance to compensate for the damage to the monetary assets and fixed loss by the branches of private banks, which amounted to 37 branches in the provinces occupied by the terrorist advocate and documented with the Central Bank of Iraq. 7. Activating the decisions of the Council of Ministers No. 313 of 2016 and 218 of 2017 regarding the settlement of salaries of employees and the demand from government departments to settle their salaries as they wish and not to direct them to settle salaries in government banks exclusively.